Welcome back to The Red Thread, a Left Voice podcast where we bring theory to life and discuss how to dismantle capitalism, one conversation at a time. I'm Melanie, and I'm joined by my co-host, Emma.
Hey everyone, it's Valentine's Day, and we're bringing you an episode all about love, through the lens of Marxism, of course. Throughout history, particular conceptions of romantic love have been at the service of the ruling class. So today we're asking, what would love look like in socialism? To explore this, we're diving into the revolutionary ideas of Alexandra Kollontai, one of the most influential Bolshevik thinkers on love, marriage, and gender.
We're going to explore how love has evolved throughout history and how it's shaped by economic and social systems. And in the current era, that means capitalism. So if you're thinking about roses, chocolates, and romance this February, stick around because we've got a very different take on love coming your way.
To start, let's take a second to think about the history of love as told by revolutionary Marxists. Alexandra Kollontai was a Bolshevik who participated in the Russian Revolution in 1917 and wrote and discussed extensively about free love. Unlike the traditional idea that love is this timeless, eternal feeling, Kollontai viewed it as a historical construct that changes according to the needs of society. She argued that ideologies around love have always been used to organize society in favor of a ruling class at different points in history.
Exactly. And if you look at her work, Make Way for the Winged Eros, she talks about how different forms of love have been considered legal or, on the other hand, sinful, depending on whether or not they aligned with the interests of the ruling class at that time in history. It wasn't about love in the personal sense, but about how love helped maintain social order.
And this brings us to Engels, who built on the same line of thought. In The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, Engels traces the development of the family structure. He argues that before private property emerged, societies were more communal and families weren't isolated units.
Right, and it wasn't until private property came into play that the nuclear family structure was created. Engels saw this as a way to pass down property, especially male-owned property, leading to the patriarchal family system that we have today. Let's talk about love under capitalism. While capitalism thrives on competition and individualism, that's actually only part of the story. It's not just the individual that matters, it's the individual family unit. Capitalism prioritizes the nuclear family as the central building block of society rather than collective, wider-reaching social ties. Capitalist ideology says that romantic partnerships should be chosen based on love. But in reality, there are lots of economic incentives to find a partner to split the bills with and to stay in relationships that are at best boring and at worst violent. This is especially true for women who are paid less for the same labor, and particularly for women of color and working class women. This structure teaches us to care more about our spouse and children than anyone else, such as our community and the wider world.
The nuclear family plays a critical role in maintaining capitalism's systems of exploitation and private property. Love, as we know it today, gets twisted to serve these economic functions. Kollontai argues that in order to maintain the stability of the family as a key economic unit for the bourgeois system, a new moral ideal of love emerged that became tied to marriage and the nuclear family.
So, this modern idea of love, especially love as it relates to marriage, it wasn't some timeless human truth. It's a bourgeois concept to stabilize the family unit and make it more economically functional. What could be more romantic than that?
And the family unit is a perfect source of unpaid labor for the system. Childcare, cooking, cleaning, laundry, all at no cost to the state or bosses. And the lion's share of that work falls on women. Kollontai describes it this way. The entire morality of the bourgeoisie was directed towards the concentration of capital. The ideal was the married couple working together to improve their welfare and to increase the wealth of their particular family unit, divorced as it was from society.
And to this day, it's a system that limits love in profound ways. Economic necessity traps people in relationships, and the constant grind of surviving under capitalism does not leave that much room for intimacy. Working class people work long, grueling shifts, they have to work forced overtime, they have long commutes, and that's all time that we can't spend with our partners, our families, and our friends.
So while capitalism holds up this model traditional family, It also imposes conditions that can make this ideal elusive for the vast majority of the working class. No rigid gender roles can be imposed on women who have to enter the workforce. No innocent childhood for working class kids who have to get jobs too young, or kids in Palestine who are losing their homes and family members in a genocide. And it's even more elusive for families broken up by mass imprisonment, deportation, or forced immigration due to imperialism. And as more and more women enter the workforce, both as a product of the women's liberation movement and as a product of the shrinking ability to support a family on a single salary, the traditional family unit seems to be buckling under the weight of capitalism.
And then you have biological determinism, the idea that women are biologically destined to be mothers and caregivers. This nonsense has stubbornly persisted despite the loads of examples that we have in our society of the opposite of that, and like the differently shaped and sized families that we see all over the country and all over the world these days. Like same-sex couples, women who don't give birth, stay-at-home dads, and other non-traditional family models. It has persisted despite the fact that Black women have, since the beginnings of capitalism, been forced into the most backbreaking and abusive work alongside Black men. In fact, this has been used to pathologize Black people and argue that Black people could escape poverty through the nuclear family, rather than addressing institutional racism and fighting for reparations and beyond.
Although the family and gender roles have become more fluid since the women's liberation movement and the LGBTQ+ rights movement, the cis heteronormative family model has remained, perpetuating the oppression of queer people. We're seeing this right now with the rise of the right that's escalating its attacks on trans folks in particular.
Also, it's hard to bring up Valentine's Day in the 21st century without talking about loneliness. Elevating exclusive romantic relationships has helped create the era of loneliness that a lot of people talk about these days. From movies, shows, and books to laws and tax codes, capitalism reinforces the idea that our lives should be built around the one that we build our lives with. For people who don't fall into that structure, life can be super isolating.
That's why socialism offers such a transformative alternative. Socialism frees love from these economic chains, allowing it to become what Kollontai calls Winged Eros, a love that isn't bound by economic necessity or unpaid labor. It's a love that unites people, rather than isolating them in nuclear family units.
It's a vision of love that's radically different, one where relationships aren't shaped by exploitation, but by genuine connection and collective solidarity. Let's explore how Kollontai and other revolutionaries imagined what love could look like in a socialist society.
The Bolsheviks, including Kollontai, saw love and women's liberation as essential parts of the socialist revolution. They quickly passed the most advanced women's rights legislation at the time, legalizing abortion and divorce, decriminalizing homosexuality, and taking on women's unpaid labor through public services like childcare and cafeterias.
In the socialist feminist tradition, criticism of the patriarchal family as an institution has always been linked to the struggle to transform the whole of capitalism. The patriarchal family, along with the oppression of women, as well as the subordination of children who are also often considered property, cannot be dissolved by just an act of sheer will. The task instead is to create the foundational conditions for improvement. New material, social, and cultural foundations that allow radical transformation of personal relationships, love, friendship, and care as part of the transition to socialism.
Exactly. And Trotsky emphasized this when he talked about the need to eliminate the family hearth, that old, stuffy institution where women were relegated to endless, unpaid domestic labor. He envisioned that the socialist workers' state would take care of things like maternity houses, kindergartens, and even social dining rooms, liberating women from these endless duties. And beyond that, Trotsky and the Bolsheviks had the ultimate goal of a stateless society, in which no class was suppressed beneath another, and people could govern themselves. In this sense, socializing childcare among workers was a transitory policy that was actually designed to become obsolete.
Yeah, so the idea was not necessarily to abolish the family instantly, but to use these liberatory policies to facilitate the withering away of the family, along with the state. Lenin also had some good quotes about the end of the family because, as far as I can tell, he hated chores. In the quote of his that I read in Women, State, and Revolution by Wendy Goldman, he says that women wasted their labor on barbarously unproductive, petty, nerve-wracking, and stultifying drudgery. And he figured the only way to deal with such foul work was to socialize it and reduce the amount of time that any one person or group had to spend on it. And more important than hating chores, which I totally get, liberating women from these responsibilities was necessary for them to get paid jobs and gain independence from men, which was the only way that they'd be able to enter relationships freely and out of love, not out of need. So, what would love look like in a socialist society? Well, Kollontai argued that it would no longer be about ownership or possession. Yay! No more be mine or trying to control someone's body or desires. Instead, love would be about solidarity and comradeship and care for the collective.
Kollontai uses the term comrade to describe this form of love, and it's a powerful one. A comrade is someone you fight alongside, someone you trust deeply, and someone you care for with a sense of collective solidarity. She saw this as the highest expression of love.
And when you think about it, this kind of love, which is not confined to marriage or romantic partnerships, could actually strengthen the community as a whole. Because like we've talked about in capitalism, romantic love that leads to marriage and family is elevated above everything else. Kollontai points out that that little thing called friendship, for example, is completely useless for capitalism. What she says is, bourgeois society was built on the principles of individualism and competition and has no place for friendship as a moral factor. While useless for capitalism, I will say that friendship is endlessly fulfilling for people. Friendship is a sentimental, mutually loving relationship that you can have with one person or with a group in all kinds of creative and communal forms, and that doesn't do anything for capitalist production.
And if we could build emotional and intellectual bonds that don't isolate us into pairs, but expand across society in the form of comradely love, it would make the collective stronger. And that's exactly what Kollontai was aiming for. But of course, Kollontai's vision wasn't fully realized, especially after Stalin's rise to power and the bureaucratization of the Soviet Union, which introduced measures to reinforce the oppression of women in the family unit. Still, we can take lessons from Kollontai's ideas in the here and now. We can challenge the possessive, jealous forms of love that capitalism encourages.
Absolutely. We can start by rejecting the idea that one person should fulfill all our emotional needs. In fact, Kollontai's ideas point to a future where love expands to include everyone, where our friendships, our communities, and our romantic relationships are equally valued.
It's a big vision, but it's worth striving for. The capitalist system isolates us, but in socialism, connection and solidarity would be at the core of everything, and that's where true love can thrive.
That's all for today's episode of The Red Thread. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Kollontai's vision of love and how this radical love can transform society.
Capitalism tries to sell us love in the form of expensive dinners and diamond rings, but real love, the kind that could change the world, is actually free. It's in the connections we build, the struggles we share, and the future we're fighting for together.
And while this vision of love as comradeship might seem very different from how we traditionally understand it, it's actually exactly what we need right now.
Completely agree. Thanks for listening in. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. We'll be back soon with more conversations on how revolutionary ideas can change the world.
Take care, comrades, and happy Valentine's Day.